you need no introduction, especially in front of this group, but you have some exciting updates to share.
Yes.
Do you want to fill everyone in?
So we have a book coming out soon. And I recently joined a really incredible team, an incredible group at Google. So it's been wonderful being here, hearing about folks' problems and findings and all the new stuff. So hopefully we'll be able to continue sharing some good things. And I think Abi has an update.
So, yeah, I think it was last week or two. The time is blurred, but we announced that DX is going to be joining Atlassian, which is a really exciting milestone for the company. And I also just want to say, Nicole, thank you so much for all the partnership and the research we've done. And also, I think a lot of credit goes to you for this entire space of engineering measurement and developer productivity. So,
and we couldn't do any of it without this incredible community of folks who similarly see how important the space is and do all the hard work of convincing people it's important and also doing the work. So thanks to all of you.
So today we're here to talk a little bit about the book that's coming out. And firstly, I want to apologize. The talk description says that the book was released August of this year. The book is not yet released. Nicole, when is it coming out?
Late November. Stay tuned.
And Nicole, maybe let's just start with what's the why for this book? Like, why are we publishing a book on developer experience now?
Yeah. I think, in a lot of the discussions that Abi and I had, and I've had this idea for this book for a while, is that in all of the teams and organizations that we got to work with, I kept seeing, and I think Abi, kind of said a very similar set of questions coming up, right? And because we've gone through it so many times and we've been burned so many times and we've learned how to do things so many times, we were like, there's kind of a process in general that you go through when you're starting up a DevX project or diving in or figuring out more data or prioritizing either data or projects, communicating what it is that you found to various stakeholders. And I think I hit the point one day where I was like, if I just wrote this down, I could tell people to read the book because my calendar just couldn't fit enough people.
And so the book's coming out in November. For everyone here, we did promise early access in the talk abstract. So if you go to our website, there's a QR code up on the slide. The domain is developerexperiencebook.com. If you put in your email, we will be sure to get you early content, early access as the book starts to come online. And today for the session, what we wanted to do is just kind of pull out some of our favorite sound bites out of the book and just talk about them because they're so relevant, especially today, especially with what's going on in AI and developer productivity. So I want to start with AI because, Nicole, as we were getting early feedback on the book, it was right about the same time that AI was just reaching peak volume level in the industry. And so one of the questions we kept getting was, hey, what's the relevance of developer experience in the age of AI? What would you say to that?
There's the pithy answer and then there's the real answer. So the pithy snarky one is, if you want to sprinkle AI on all of your things, you still have to be able to ship your software. So even if you think AI is taking over, there's still so much there, even in the rest of a traditional pipeline to consider. And then I think the more nuanced answer is that even as AI is reinventing so many things and disrupting, there's still sort of a common framework and an approach that you can take regardless of the context, right? I know a lot of these things I used with folks that I've worked with on mainframes and, air-gapped systems. There are things that we've used with modern technology companies. There are things that I continue to use now with companies and teams undergoing AI in terms of what questions should I be thinking about asking? How should I think about identifying the right data? How should I think about deprecating data? How do I communicate what I found? And who should I be talking to about it?
And I would add, so much of the opportunity with AI and the SDLC is about improving the developer experience. And so only through understanding, instrumenting, measuring, understanding developer experience, can we actually have successful AI rollouts? That's how you need to think about targeting, where you're going to deploy AI, how you're rolling out AI, whether your rollouts are successful, and ultimately whether you're getting ROI from all the budget that's going into AI.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nicole, another question I think both of us get asked is like, what's changing, right? We had already mostly written the book, again, while AI was reaching peak volume. And so we had a lot of discussions about it. Like, what does this change? And what doesn't change? What are your thoughts on that?
I think some things that changes have to do with the context, right? So speed is much faster. Speed expectations are much faster. Level of ambition really needs to kind of go up and rise from a product and a strategic perspective. Other things that change are, for certain parts of that developer lifecycle, what's possible, what's not possible. But in general, again, I think much of this doesn't change. Like you said, we really need to be thinking about the developer experience, right? Because let's look at like lines of code, which is a trash metric, right? Like AI can spit out hundreds of lines of code for you. Well, now from the developer's perspective, what do we need to think about to make sure that they're coding in a good environment? Because now we've basically switched something that was primarily writing and rating and then reviewing later to accepting a whole bunch, prompting, accepting, and then reviewing. So we've changed that kind of cognitive cycle for developers. And so how do we want to rethink that or re-instrument it? And so, I think that's one thing that doesn't change is asking the right questions and asking good questions about what developers are seeing, what developers are hitting, and what we need to, measure and change about that.
And I think we'll talk more about measurement later, but I think measurement is a particular area where, again, some things are changing, some things are not. I think we still need these kind of broad organizational ways to benchmark and understand and measure productivity. At the same time, as the ways in which we work change, we need new ways of measuring those new developer workflows and new ways that we are building software. Moving on, we spent a lot of time in the book talking about the business side of developer experience. And this quote, this soundbite really resonates because someone just was backstage asking me this exact question of, hey, how do I get executives to care about developer productivity, to care about developer experience? You have a lot of experience championing this, both within large organizations and also the industry at large.
And you've seen a lot too.
I have, yeah. What's your advice on this?
I think, and we talk about this in the book and we have, workbooks that go along with it, but it's speaking to your audience about things that matter to them, right? So how can we align our work and our goals with the things that, yes, developers and eng managers care about, but also executives. They care about delivering product faster. They care about delivering value and capturing market share. They care about managing costs or reducing costs. And so sometimes it can be as simple as, just sitting down and explicitly identifying what are their goals, what are their needs. Maybe their goal is a promotion, right? How can our work help them achieve what they want? And then gear it kind of that way and do the math that kind of answers some of these questions. I'll say that one comes up a lot for me. And so we included several examples about like what are the different types of things you can do. You can talk about money recovered. You can talk about costs saved. You can talk about lots of things that, some of us in here might not love because it's not perfect, right? We kind of need, do we know this? Has anyone ever had to like create one of these metrics and squint at it just a little bit? Thank you, right? And the rest of you, I'm sorry, but just wait, it's coming. But it's also really helpful to at least start a discussion and get on the same page instead of, well, developers will be happier and developers will be faster. Like that doesn't always translate well.
And I would add that this idea of connecting developer experience and productivity to what execs in the business cares about, I think right now I've been telling people is such a great opportunity because most businesses right now care a lot about this because they care a lot about AI and they care a lot about accelerating. They care about how is this changing our workforce. And so I think right now, like the time is ripe for developer productivity and developer experience. And of course, I think the anti-patterns we see are, developer experience leaders who go to execs and are talking just about metrics like cycle time or developer satisfaction. These are really important signals for us to understand and diagnose and improve the SDLC, but most executives don't inherently really care or even know what cycle time or developer satisfaction means.
Yeah, exactly. And again, right, like why should they care? Why do they care? One example that I know came up in some of our early discussions with several leaders. Thank you to many of you who I know took calls with us. One that came up was someone saying, well, I can reduce test coverage, right? I can make tests go faster. We can improve test coverage. And they're like, my developers are going to love this. They're going to understand, right? Like long build times, long test times. This sucks. To an executive, instead, what I can do is I can take some of those numbers and I can convert that into cloud spend saved, capacity needs reduced. And many developers also aren't going to care about capacity needs reduced unless like it's really a bottleneck for them. And so just thinking about how we can translate for different audiences and put it in a frame that speaks to them, because some execs, like you said, they don't really understand or appreciate the development cycle, but most of them care about money or capacity or something like that.
And the storytelling component is underappreciated. I think it's not just about showing up with the right bullet points and the right metrics.
A screen full of numbers. I love numbers, but if you only give them numbers, they just glaze over.
Any advice on just how to tell that story effectively, especially now in the current environment we're in?
So I like to take a kind of a two-tiered approach, right? Like I want to have some data. I want to have something that we can anchor on that's real or real-ish, right? But then I also want to have a quote or an example to say, this particular process or this particular step is taking a lot of time. And this quote, right? So I want to say a large company that I worked with as an example. We kept telling them, we're like, the inner loop is pretty good, but the outer loop is like really difficult. The outer loop takes a long time. And then we were even like, well, getting it shipped is really hard. And they were kind of like, and threw them some numbers, but also without a really good benchmark or baseline, they don't know what's good and what's bad. And also sometimes you throw them a benchmark and a baseline, they're like, oh, but that's not us, or that's not what I should compare to. And so I could say, here's how long it's taking. Here's how long we see it typically take for similar teams in this org. But by the way, in our latest developer satisfaction survey, we had a few people write in specifically about this. For example, here's one quote, and it was a developer saying, I have to write thousands of lines of code just to get things shipped. And that's in addition to the feature. And then suddenly they were like, oh, okay, this is extra work that is not about a product that, and then I can point out, what if every single developer is having to do this? What does that mean for our capacity and our velocity? If we had a dedicated team fixing this, then you would unblock everyone. And that kind of, I think, helped get it going. So combining some data with some quotes and some stories to like bring it to life.
And so you got onto our favorite topic, which is surveys. I think it's safe to say there's probably only one person on this planet who is more passionate than me about surveying developers, and that would be you.
I think there's some folks in the crowd that can appreciate a good survey. And okay, who here, can I make a quick aside? Who here thinks, I will close my eyes, surveys are kind of full of like crap data? Right? Also, who has ever seen bad data come out of a build system or a test system or anything else? All of us, right? So like, I think that's one thing that really speaks to me is we can find like data anywhere. It's all over the place. So what we can do is take steps to get better data out of any source that it comes from, right? We can write more specific and more targeted survey questions. We can structure our survey in a way that is easier to respond in a way that like gives us, the data that we're really trying to get. And surveys are also great because they can give us insights into pieces of our workflow and our development environment that just aren't instrumented yet, or maybe are instrumented poorly or incompletely.
And obviously the journey of DX as a company and the journey of so many leaders and companies here is that they run into objections and skepticism about survey data, survey-based measurement. How do you overcome that? How have you been able to overcome that?
Yeah.
And you did even in your previous book and Accelerate.
I mean, I think there are a few strategies, right? One is, I mean, there's always got to be a little bit of a vibe check, right? Like, what are they concerned about? Or do they assume that developers are just like coddled and whiny, and so you can't trust any of it? Do they think it's not precise enough, and so the math doesn't math, right? Like, what piece of it's that's there? And, there are different strategies. There's, here's how I've written it. Here's why it's useful. Here are the things that we've done to accommodate that. And usually that kind of a deep dive is just in response to a particular question and kind of a sidebar. But also just pointing out that I hear you. This is not going to be precise data. But if I want to capture something like an entire workflow or, something similar, we could instrument all the systems. I would love that. And they're like, yeah, let's get precise data. I'm like, okay, well, it's probably going to be 2 years and it's going to be about this cost, plus or minus 100 devs. Are you ready to make that investment? And then they're just like, well, no, how else can I get data? And I'm like, well, in that case, asking people is actually super important because they can give you a view of end to end, right? Is this high friction? Is this low friction? Are there areas, maybe even at tool handoffs, where like I've seen places where several tools are instrumented quite well, but that handoff isn't. And people can tell you about it, right? It's an incredible tool for triaging.
Yeah, still to this day, I think it's just an interesting phenomenon that, on one hand, the industry values engineers and knowledge workers so highly, especially right now. But on the other hand, when it comes to things like surveys and getting data from our highly coveted workers, there's so much skepticism and distrust. What about combining survey data with system data? You've written a great paper on this called DevOps Metrics that I've shared with many people, but how should people think about like the combination of the two?
So I love combining them when it's possible. And like one thing that we can keep in mind is like, what are the strengths and weaknesses of each, and then use them to complement each other, right? So surveys can be great for quick turnaround. They can be good for point in time data. They can be good for, again, capturing sentiment, right? Like anything subjective is really hard to do with system data. Where if you want something that is precision, right? If we want to know how long, sorry for DORA metrics, they're not perfect. But if we want to know like generally how long does it take to do a thing, a day, a week, a month, a year, right? People are pretty good at hunching that. If we want to know down to the second or the millisecond how long something takes, don't ask people. Don't ask people, right? That's going to be for systems. And we can stream data out of systems. We should not be surveying people every week or every day. And so thinking about where the strengths and the weaknesses are, right? Gaps in system data, you can take some statistical approaches to find them, but sometimes it can just be really, really challenging when you could just ask a set of developers.
I'll end with an analogy on this. It's the best way I've personally found to sort of convey the importance of both. And an analogy goes, if you go to the doctor and they take a bunch of objective readings of your health, just your blood pressure, your temperature, your heart rate, and they were to say, hey, looks like you're 100% healthy, there's nothing wrong here, but they'd never asked you, do you feel sick? Like, that would be absurd, right? And conversely, if you were to go to the doctor and they were to ask you, how are you feeling? And you said, fine, and they didn't actually take any objective diagnostics, that would also be missing out on a big piece of the picture. And so I think that's my analogy for how I think why you need both sides of the puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now this is something I think you've pioneered, like this message in the industry of needing to measure productivity and developer experience through various dimensions, not just one number. What should people be thinking about today, especially with AI, in terms of the importance of this?
I will say, some of this started when I had probably the 100,000th person say, what's the one metric that matters? So you've been there. Like that's not real. And so I wrote the space framework with a handful of folks. Some of them are here, who are much smarter than me on, how do we want to think about identifying the metrics, right? Because I had been talking to companies for years about, pick metrics that are held in attention, pick metrics that measure different types of things, pick ones that are like this. And so space was nice because it's an acronym, so I can remember it. But it also gave guidance for this. So, S, for folks who haven't heard of it, S is satisfaction and well-being. You can ask a developer how they feel, or how they feel about tools, or how they feel about something in general. P is performance. So what's the outcome? Various types of outcome metrics. A is activity. So these are counts. That's where most people start, is with A, right? Because it's just kind of easier to instrument. C is communication and collaboration. So this can be how people work together. It can also be how our systems work together, right? Like what APIs are getting called, which APIs are not getting called. And then E is efficiency and flow. And that's generally kind of a time-based metric. How long does it take to do something? Or, for developers, you can ask them, are they able to get into the flow, right? And that can kind of speak to interruptions. And, I think you asked a question about, what's changing, what's staying the same. I will say so far, even in AI contexts, space holds up fairly well. You still want to think about covering at least 3 of those dimensions. It's also highlighting a few things that may be raising in importance. I know Brian Hauk mentioned it. He's working on, space and AI. And one thing I'll mention is, trust and reliability, right? Not that we didn't trust systems before, but it was kind of a different world, right? So I did work very early in my research career with sysadmins, right? System administrators. They were always testing and verifying data and checking if they could trust it, because if they made a mistake, everything went down, right? You do not want to be on the front page of any paper. Developers, we could trust our compiler. So trust wasn't necessarily one of our top criteria and priorities. Now that we have agents and well, not just agents, but any kind of prompt, sometimes giving us good stuff and sometimes giving us some fairy tale, that becomes much more relevant. And so, moving forward, again, space tends to hold up fairly well. I know Irini Kaliamvoku has also done a great study on space and AI. But then also kind of think to yourself, in my context, with the tools that we're using, with the environment in which we work, what else is kind of a pressing concern for developers and for the environment? What else do I want to have data on? And again, this works for both survey data and for system data.
So space came out at a moment in the industry when, kind of similar to now, companies were rushing to get signal on productivity because it was when everyone was shifting to hybrid or remote work. Yeah. We're in a similar period right now, and a lot of people in this room are having their bosses or boss's boss come to them and say, hey, what are we generating more lines of code? What's our PR throughput now with AI? What's our commit throughput? How do you respond to when you're put in that role? How do you rebut that or respond to that and tell the importance of focusing on these different dimensions? How do you deliver that message?
So I'd like to just kind of take half step back and say, well, what is it that's important here? What is it that we're trying to do? They say, well, developer productivity or developer speed. I'm like, okay, cool. Productivity for what? Speed for what? Right? Do you just want them or coverage for, duration? Do you just want them coding 8 hours a day? Because also that's not real, right? A bunch of the focus and cognitive load literature shows that that you can't be in a highly focused, deep thinking state for 8 hours in a row. It's not real. But then they'll say, oh, well, I want better feature velocity, or I want insights from my customers. And I'm like, okay, well, that means that we're identifying, let's say, the right things, which is a little outside of my scope. I'm like, you own the business. And how fast does it take to get through the entire system? How correct is it? How safe is it? How secure is it? And then how quickly can we get signal back from customers? We need that full feedback loop, whoever your customers are. And then they'll say, oh, well, but PRs capture that. And I'm like, yes and no, right? I will say right now, we don't have a perfect set of answers, right? This is definitely emerging. I know we've had discussions about this. But, we can talk about that, because now when your AI little bot can write hundreds of lines of code. More code, I mean, the joke, not joke, has always been sometimes the best thing you can do is delete code. But now it's turned up to 11 because they can just be writing thousands of lines of code that are not maintainable. And so, sometimes I'll have an aside with an exec and I'll say, listen, lines of code has always been a bunk metric. It's always been bad. Now it might be relevant in certain cases, and they get all excited and they lean forward. And I'm like, but not for the cases that you think. We need to know which code survives our tests, survives our builds, is safe and secure and high quality for whichever definition of quality you want. But now also we need to think about the models that we're using, the models that we're training. If we're training on models, then what proportion of that code came from people versus what proportion of that code came from AI bots or AI agents? And then they're like, they sit back a minute and they're like super disappointed because I didn't tell them lines of code was going to be their fancy metric. And but then they're like, oh, I have to think about something that I've never really had to think about before. And that at least helps kind of start the conversation around, you're right, we don't have a certain set of metrics. And then I always bring up space because it's like a nice shorthand. What are the things that we care about and what types of signal can we get from what different types of systems so that we can answer the question that you're going for, because I want this to be useful, right?
So I think it's fair to say for those of us who work in this space, it's just history repeating itself. It's the same message, it's the same assumptions that businesses make that, hey, shouldn't this be simple? Can't we just count the lines of code or number of pull requests? And we have to continue repeating the same message over and over again back to the business. So Nicole, this is a topic I know you're personally really passionate about. When we were writing the book, this is an area you really dove deep into, and I know it really closely ties to the work you've been doing and the work you're now doing at Google. What do you mean when you say think of metrics as a product?
So this, again, I care deeply about, and I think it's because a lot of times people, no one in this room, other people. Just think of metrics as a thing that you get quickly and then you run a number and then you're done. And by taking a product mindset, and we've got, like Abi said, we've got a pretty solid chapter on this in the book to kind of walk folks through it. Or like you can hand this to someone else. And it's, when we think of a product, what do we think about? If we were to pull in an incredible PM for a product, what would they ask? They would ask, what's our market? Who are our customers? What problems does it solve? Side rant, I hate so much when people use a metric because it's there, but it's not answering a question or solving a problem, right? What's our minimum viable, back in like product land, what's our minimum viable product? Can I kick something out? Can I test it? Can I iterate on it and improve it? At what point is it like my cash cow and it's going to be fine? And at what point do I need to think about deprecating this metric or this product? Sorry. But we can ask and we should ask all of those same questions when we think about metrics and our metric strategy, because we can't just waltz in and say, well, here's an entire suite of metrics that we're going to build over the next 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. And then we're going to move forward, because that's also not how product works. We need to think about a handful of features. We need to know who our customers are. And in this case, metrics often has several customers. One of our customers is going to be like me as a DevX team, because it's going to inform the next questions I need to ask. It can inform developers and eng managers because it gives them insights into their systems. Our customers can be executives because it helps them make business decisions and handle resource allocations. And then also, at some point, you're going to deprecate a metric because it's either stopped being useful because your environment changed, your tooling has changed, or you found a better one, right? And you continue to kind of validate and improve and have, again, this strategic roadmap of what metrics do I prioritize when, and let's revisit that, periodically.
Nicole, one thing I've observed in my experience is that designing for the DevX team, designing for ourselves is actually the easier problem in many cases. Like we have pretty focused problems and jobs to be done. We need to set our roadmap. We need to figure out what's not working across SDLC. But it's the other audiences and stakeholders. It's the team managers, it's the executives, where I found there's a lot more nuance, care, and risks. It seems like if you put some metrics in front of managers, they're sometimes just going to run with them. And if they're the wrong metrics, it's going to lead to the wrong incentives and behaviors. So you've seen this happen for decades now. What's your advice on, for that audience, how do you do this right? How do you put the right things in front of them? What should you be thinking about?
And I think this comes back to treating your metrics and your DevX work as a product, right? If we have a product, we will have a go-to-market strategy. We will have different types of communication for different audiences, because even if you give folks a metric, many times it's without context. They don't know what it means. Like, they think they know what it means, but also, like, how is the metric calculated? How is it defined? How can I look at a by the way, it's not just a dashboard, but like, how do I look at a dashboard of metrics and know what I should be doing and what steps to take? And so when we think about it with that lens, it's, again, identifying the problems that each group has or likely has and finding ways to communicate it to them, right? So, with product, we have product marketing. With developer tools, we often have DevRel. And many companies have internal comms teams, internal DevRel, internal training and education to help different teams in different areas of a company understand and take action on the metrics and then provide feedback.
So once you get the data and you shine the light on the SDLC, you see all the problems and bottlenecks and opportunities, the next question is, now what? What do we go and actually fix? Where do we direct our energy and investments? And this is a question I've struggled with providing clarity on for a long time. I've reached for different product management frameworks that are out there. Kind of told people, well, every company needs to figure it out on their own. While writing this book, I think you, and in working with some companies we both know, I think you've been able to provide a really good framework and approach for this. Talk about the RICE framework. Talk about how leaders can apply this type of framework to decision making.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'll say my teams and folks that I've worked with are probably going to laugh a little bit at this. I always love a spreadsheet, and I love to think about, like, what's important and how are we doing generally. So this is actually a snapshot from the workbook. We have, I want to say it's almost 100 pages of workbook. So that'll be one of the things that, we share parts of with you folks early. But I like RICE as a good place to start. And your RICE score is, what's your reach, what's your impact, what's your confidence, and what's your effort. Later in the book, we also have more detailed RICE if you want to use numbers. But this is such a great way to get started, especially when you're first getting signal either into the entire initiative or just, a piece of work where you don't have great, really specific, precise signal yet. But you'll ask what the reach is, right? Is it high, medium, or low? Do we impact all of the developers at the company? Do we only affect a team if we take on this work? Impact, same, right? High, medium, or low. And sometimes for this, I'll take a look at business impact, perceived impact. Are people going to feel this or not? But then I just punch it with a high, medium, or low. Confidence. How confident am I that I can do this in the time frame that is either estimated or acceptable, or what folks are expecting? And then what's the level of effort? And so, in general, we want high reach, impact, and confidence, low effort. And I've found that many times that helps folks kind of identify a good place to start. Now, in terms of DevX, we also follow on with a handful of things like, are there existing initiatives that you can, draft off of? Does this show up on an exec's, OKRs or radar? Is this something that they care deeply about? So we kind of combine RICE with a handful of other things that are much more detailed and specific to DevX work that then you can go through because, like you said, I've worked with folks, and many times, even in fairly mature DevX programs and kind of platform instrumentation programs, their biggest struggle is prioritizing what comes next.
I've seen the same thing, and if you pick the wrong things, it's usually the next quarter or 6 months later that teams realize, shoot, that just wasn't where we should have invested in it. It's my observation that it seems like the effort and the confidence are the most commonly misjudged, meaning it seems like people naturally gravitate towards the biggest problems without filtering that through the lens of feasibility, especially so the organizational feasibility in terms of red tape or change management. And I think one component of that I think is really important is the local versus global scoping of problems, right? In the book, we talk about how there are some problems that are good to address through sort of cross-cutting, centralized investments. And then there's many other aspects of developer experience that are inherently local problems that need attention from local teams, team managers to address. What have you seen around this in your experience?
I'm with you. There are some things that you can start at the local level. You can do a grassroots effort, and there's some things that like you just need the organizational leverage to pull things through. And so, for confidence and effort, I agree with you. Sometimes those are the things that are misjudged the most. And I'll say in particular, with confidence and effort, internal programs like platform and infrastructure and DevX. There's this great article. I want to remember what it is. I'll share out. But it talks about how all of our projects tend to take longer than we estimate, right? No, is everyone on schedule here? Hire me. And one of the reasons they tend to be off so poorly, there's a couple of reasons. One is that we tend to handle some of the hairy questions later. And if we can pull risk to the front, like test something out and see if that's actually doable, see if that's going to be a blocker, get that done quick, right? Because quick wins and quick learnings can be super, super valuable, both in terms of like team morale, the confidence that the company has in you and your ability to kind of outline this work. And another thing is that we tend to think about things in medians and not means. Okay, what does that mean? We tend to think about how long things typically take, right? Like this typically takes this. I've seen this happen in about this time frame, right? So that's a median. And like many times when we're doing analysis, we want to use medians because that's the typical case. But also, very few things in systems and infrastructure follow a normal curve, right? You usually have a lot of outliers, and those outliers tend to be at the longer side and not at the faster side. And so when we kind of do these estimations, it can be super helpful to sit and write down, right? Like, this is what I typically think. Okay, what's the worst case scenario? What are the projects that I've heard of or I know of or that other people have heard of that took way longer than they estimated, and why? And the thing I like about that is that it kind of gives us a clearer view of that. Again, this is when we're still kind of hunching, but it also helps us identify up front what some of these risky questions are that we want to get out of the way first.
And to the question of the local opportunities for team managers, I think every DevProd, DevX leader I talk to has this goal in mind of empowering their teams, empowering the developers, empowering everyone in the organization to make their own improvements to developer productivity. In practice, I found that this is very hard to achieve. There's sort of an expectation versus reality problem in a lot of organizations. Let's try to unpack A, where have you seen this happen? And B, how can leaders here create this type of flywheel in their own companies?
Yeah. So again, I think it's like really understanding what types of projects are going to work well starting at a grassroots level, right? So it could be things like paper cuts. It could be things like improving your own local test suite. It can be things like improving documentation, even just changing cultural norms around the way work is done, the way work is prioritized, because a lot of times it's changing a process is going to be your biggest bang for your buck early on, right? And then as a next step, reaching out to other teams who have similar challenges or similar problems or asking similar questions, sharing out what you've done, right? Do a demo day, set this up as a hackathon, share what you've done and see if it applies to them, kind of learn back and forth. I will say, in my experience, and I think you said in yours, at some point, bubbling up to an organization-wide, a company-wide initiative is what's needed for at least a handful of problems, right? Like one team should not be, unless it's their job, they shouldn't be re-architecting an entire system, for example, right? Like that takes organizational influence, organizational push, organizational pull to kind of allocate resources for that. But in the meantime, you can make a lot of headway and improve things for a team and then build up the case for why this is so important.
And I think one of the things I've seen attempted many times, but not pan out is, as you said, these types of initiatives or bottoms-up efforts without the top-down buy-in. I think that at the end of the day, in a business, you need that top-down support, at least endorsement, and ideally push to get everyone to do work in developer productivity. Because I think the reality is that, as DevX leaders, we just live in this world. We're looking at the data. We see this tremendous opportunity. But the reality for most product teams is that they have product deliverables. They're behind on their deadlines. There's a ton of pressure from the business to get features out the door. And so if we want to get teams and managers to fix their developer productivity issues, I think it needs to actually begin with elevating to the top and getting that top-down pressure. At the same time, empowering, cultivating, encouraging the local teams to also care about these issues. So we'll end with not a soundbite from the book, because the landscape, the industry is moving so fast. It's hard to keep up when you're writing a book. Nicole, what are you seeing right now in your work, but also all the other leaders and companies you talk with? Like, what's your advice on rolling out AI successfully in the SDLC?
So there are a handful of things. And I know Brian Hauk has done some great work on this as well. But you can't have impact with AI if people aren't using it, right? So sometimes an initial step is just adoption and use, but that's not enough, right? Like having some type of training, having some type of safe space to experiment, having formal approval from an executive, right? Because people can be like, oh, well, it's probably okay, but what if I get fired for using AI? So if companies really want to embrace this, they need to treat it like a whole new initiative, right? Carve out time, get people access, share training, share best practices, right? Like, what does a good prompt look like? What does a silly prompt look like? Get folks building, dummy test projects. I mean, there's way too many chatbots out there, but that's actually a pretty solid first project if you want to think about, using an untrained model, pulling in RAG. It's a nice stepping stone, and then deprecate. But I think that can be important, because then once you've played with it and you kind of understand what its capabilities are, then you can realistically start thinking about, okay, could I use this to clean up my test? Could I use this for code review? And use this for code review as an example, right? Does that mean only robots do all of the code review? Probably not, right? So what are the kind of incremental steps that you could test and you could try and test and try in terms of the technology, but also test and try in terms of leadership buy-off, developer buy-off? So that's what I'm saying. What about you?
For me right now, I think the biggest key would be like aim before you fire. I think we're a little bit in this hype craze, arms race, whatever you want to call it. A lot of us are rushing to integrate these tools, to pilot these tools, and I think that's all great. When we take a step back and look at the data across a lot of organizations, what we see is that a lot of these tools we're bringing into SDLC now are really beneficial, but they're still not tackling a lot of the other problems that exist across the developer experience. I think there's tremendous opportunity going forward after we get kind of this first generation of tools integrated to take a step back and look at, okay, what are now the biggest problems? And not a shocker, a lot of them are the same problems that were the biggest problems before AI. And now how can we leverage AI to take another crack at these problems that have been, things like focus time, things that have just been really difficult organizationally for us to crack as an industry.
Absolutely.
So I want to wrap up. We'll go into Q&A after this, which we're excited about. But again, apologies that our talk advertised the book being released in August. The book will be coming out in November. Visit our website, join our mailing list to get early access and announcements and notices about the book coming out. And as Nicole mentioned, we have a really great workbook. So all the templates and worksheets from the book that are going to be available for download probably in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And you folks will get some of the earliest access to that because you're the first folks that we've told about.
And with that, thank you very much for your time, and we'll be here for Q&A.